Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear us? Can everyone see us? Welcome to the 5-year anniversary panel of Raw. I am so delighted to have everyone here. Glad you could make it on Facebook and YouTube. We have some very illustrious guests today. So we're just going to go, I think, up above me, and we're going to start with our founder, Zoe, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Danny. So I am Zoe. I'm, of course, the editor-in-chief of Ghouls magazine, also known as Sober with a Shotgun, like lots of extreme horror. So I guess Raw was always the perfect kind of film for me to discuss. And yeah, I just also want to say big thank you to you, Danny, for hosting this, because I know that you are an amazing host of all of the events, and also a big thank you to everyone that we have here for the panel today. But yeah, that's enough from me.
Thank you, Zoe. All right, I'm going to go to my right. Well, actually, that's maybe my left. We're going to go to Wren. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Wren, pronouns they, them, and I write for Killer Horror Critic and Ghouls magazine, as well as any other place I can. And favourite subgenres are revenge and erotic horror, so this one was right up my alley.
Awesome. Great. Next, we're going to go to Karlee.
Hi, I'm Karlee. I'm a writer, director, producer, and I'm one of the co-founders of Monstrous Femme Films, which is a femme-led horror collective based in Portland, Oregon.
Ooh, awesome. Very cool. Everybody's so cool. Gosh, I'm just fangirling. Okay. All right. Next, we're going to go to Addison.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Hi, I'm Addison. I'm a voice actor and a writer for fandom, and just did a piece on We Are Horror, actually on cannibalism in female-led horror films. And I also am a contributor for like Daily Grindhouse and some other, just whoever will take me. And I love New French Extremity, when female-led New French Extremity specifically. It's something I think about and yell about a lot online, and I'm so excited to get to talk about this film in a place where people want me to, instead of just yelling about it at parties.
Awesome. Next, we're going to go, last but not least, to Becky.
Yeah, hi. So I'm a podcaster and writer. I'm co-host of the podcasts Don't Point That Horror at Me and Return to Eerie, Indiana. I'm a regular contributor to The Evolution of Horror and Final Girls, and I've also written for We Are Horror and, again, anywhere that will have me, really. And I rewatched Raw for, I don't know, the 100th time or something this morning, and I'm just yet again like super excited to talk about this film. So yeah, can't wait.
Awesome. So this is going to be fantastic. We have a lot of viewer questions as well, so we're going to incorporate those into our panel discussion. So very first, we're actually going to start with a viewer question. So which character do each of you personally resonate with in this film? So we'll start with Karlee.
All right, just throwing me in there. I feel like oh my God, I'm sorry, my cat is driving me crazy. I would have to say, honestly, just because of how young I am and coming to like a new city, kind of getting thrown into that very like otherworldly world of the university setting. I would probably most relate to the main character, and I'm really sorry, guys. If anyone else wants to go, I'm gonna take care of my cat for a second.
That's okay. Our little kitten children come first. All right, next we're gonna go to Addison. What about you?
Oh yeah, Justine.
Justine? Okay, I was just trying to make sure I heard you correctly.
Oh yes, sorry. I questioned for just a moment. I was making sure I didn't mess up her name.
That's okay. What about Justine attracted you to her character?
First of all, I've been a vegetarian since I was about 8 years old, which is really strange that I love this movie as much as I do. I also entered the university environment in a hyper competitive environment. I went to school for musical theater in a hyper competitive conservatory environment. And so that kind of high pressure, high stress, like pressure cooker space, and that like sort of forced assimilation into like a new college culture and like this sort of intense environment of that. And then sort of that kind of forcing you to either change and figure out who you are or die. Sounds a little intense when I put it that way, but also theater school will mess you up. And I think I first saw the film when I was still in my undergraduate education, and I found that, and that like struck me really hard. And also like just kind of the sense of like being afraid of your own desires and sort of being uncertain of them, and that sort of journey. Obviously it wasn't exactly identical and not exactly parallel in that way, but as I spent a lot of my college experience coming into my sexuality and figuring out my identity, and I can relate to that sort of fear and reverence all at once.
Yeah, totally relatable between the university thing. Like I changed majors with my first degree to music full time. So even more stressful than it already was. Fun, but stressful at the same time. Like not as horrific and bloody as Raw, of course. But next we're gonna go to Zoe. But about you, your favorite character?
I definitely think it has to be Justine. I had an awful time at university. I hated it with everything I had. I also, it was just after my mum had passed away, so I stayed at home. I didn't live at university, which made it very hard, especially the fact that I did journalism, and it was a very competitive and quite a bitchy industry at university. So yeah, I really struggled to make friends and fit in there, and I felt like an outcast probably until my final year, when I finally made like a little group of friends who I could at least go to the union bar with after lectures. But yeah, I think seeing how Justine doesn't quite fit in within that world, and she's not typically what you would expect someone when they kind of go into university at first. I think I definitely resonate with her struggles getting on board at uni.
Next we're going to go to Becky. What about you?
Sorry.
Okay.
I think so I really love the roommate. I think it's Adrian. I mean, I'll say Adrian because I've got an English accent, and I won't try and butcher it by saying it with a bad French accent. I really love the way that he kind of just really looks out for Justine. And I think, she sort of says, doesn't she, that like she'd asked for a girl, and he really does sort of step into a bit of a role of protector. And I think he can see from straight away really that she feels quite out of her depth and, a bit kind of rabbit in headlights. And I really like the way that he, just kind of looks out for her. I feel like they've got quite a reciprocal relationship in some ways. Sometimes, she can kind of potentially like take advantage of him, but and like obviously at the end of it he comes off not great, but I don't know, I often feel like I kind of try to take on a bit of a protector role for people, but luckily I've never come off quite as badly as Adrian in the film. So
yeah, and I'm glad you weren't physically devoured as a result.
Not yet. No,
we're gonna get there. So we're gonna go, you know what I should have said first and foremost, we're gonna go into spoilers, so apologies if you haven't seen this film before, but we're going to talk about a lot of things that are full of spoilers. So lastly, we're going to go to Wren. What about you? Favorite character?
Favorite and most relatable has to be Alex, as the older sibling who has a lot of issues with authority. I always relate to her the most, especially like I went to university with my younger sibling who was doing similar courses to me, so it was very similar. And I was that person who on report cards is always, oh, they have an issue with authority. Like they would have a lot of potential if they didn't always answer back or have something to say. So yeah, Alex.
You know, it's interesting that you say that. Even though I'm a younger sibling, I've always felt like the eldest sibling in some different ways. Maybe because I guess I was like a high achiever. Like I you know, I kind of maybe put a lot more on myself than I should in a lot of different ways, and that came back to bite me in the butt, like in a lot of ways, to the point like I got like burned out of school, just like I was just exhausted, and I was just like no school for a while, and that's how I actually got into this. So less about me, back into the film. All right, next question. Um this is going to go to the very top what we were talking about. So university culture. So what do you all think university culture is? And I know this is, you know, coming from a United States and British perspective. So what do you think is university culture, and why do you think it has a lot of toxic, and you know, it's such a toxic environment, and why do you think it's allowed to manifest there? So we're actually first we're going to go to Addison. What about you?
Oh boy. I might get myself in some trouble here. No, it's fine. I think that, at least from my personal experience, like I said, I had a very sort of a different university experience from like a lot of other programs, but being in like the theater conservatory environment, what you have is a bunch of extremely competitive students in a super specialized field that already are feeling the pressures of the industry they're about to go into, plus a bunch of faculty that I don't think are able to give students the individual mentorship and attention that they need in order to feel secure in that environment. And so you get people who are terrified of the future in a microcosm, basically like crabs in a bucket, like taking chunks out of each other because they don't know where else to put those feelings. And that, combined with the fact that it's a bunch of like fresh adults that are finally figuring out who they are and what they want and being away from their families for the first time, I think it creates just this like horrible microcosm of like anxieties and aggressions, and like just it just breeds infighting. And it brings out the worst in people. It can bring out great things in people too, but I think it's an environment that brings out the worst in people. And I can see the parallels between something like that and something like the veterinary program, where it's that hyper competitive, like top of your class environment.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's just, I think it can really screw with people's heads. I also did Greek life.
Oh, wow. Now that's another conversation.
Which is its own weird ecosystem.
Yeah.
So
like
that's
bordering in some places like on occultish, but that's a different discussion.
Oh, did we learn chants and slogans and clap our little hands outside? Yes, we did.
We're not even, you know what, we're probably gonna infuse this into another question, but the whole hazing aspect of university. So if anyone wants to also tackle that, as far as the toxicity, the fact that, you know, as Addison mentioned, that all of these young people are kind of allowed to run amok and there's like no administrative oversight whatsoever. So let's jump to Becky. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd echo something that Addison sort of touched on, this idea that you've got all of these adolescents who are away from, you know, their parents, away from home for the first time for a lot of people, if they don't stay local, suddenly thrown into kind of a hotbed of hormones and kind of newly discovered freedoms. And I mean, certainly in the UK, like the vast majority of people, if you're going to go to university in the UK, you'll go straight after your A levels, which is kind of 18, 19. And so we can drink. So, you know, you go from sort of maybe going down the pub a couple of times in your hometown to try it out, to, I mean, I moved into a hall of residence at my university that had a bar in the same building. So you throw a load of cheap alcohol on top of all of those, you know, hormones and insecurities and stuff. And it's just, I mean, it's, you know, the fact that anybody comes out of university with anything bearing resemblance to an education, I find is remarkable. So
that is wild. I mean,
yeah,
just alcohol aplenty.
Yeah, and it's all, and I mean, I went to university, I started in like 2001. And it was like £1 for a pint of beer. I mean, like dirt cheap and inexhaustible supplies. So yeah, I mean, talk about asking for trouble.
Yeah, my only experience outside of the US is you know, I guess the Commonwealth, right? New Zealand, and just seeing that basically it was like Friday, the alcohol comes out, like the liquor comes out, the beer comes out, the kegs down the street. I mean, like vomit in the road, and then they go back to class on Monday. And I was just like, it was just mind-boggling to me. So anyway, less about me. What about you, Wren?
Well, I thankfully didn't. I did design and writing at university, so it wasn't quite as competitive or cutthroat, but there was definitely that element of everyone's competing, and it was as if someone succeeds, the other person like resented people and stuff. So it was a very hostile environment still. But I mean, I lived in kind of different student accommodation. So we lived in like private housing that was just full of like 10 students all packed in together in a big house with no supervision whatsoever. We weren't in halls, we weren't on the campus. So it was definitely a bit wild at times. And there were like mattresses out of windows and stuff, similar situations. So I related to that bit in Raw a lot.
Okay, awesome. What about you, Karlee?
Yeah, I feel like university culture, like just the term itself already has just like an inherently negative connotation in my mind. I don't really think of many good things when I think of hazing. I think of extremely competitive majors, and yeah, I've come from Arizona, which is home of ASU, party school central of the United States. And I specifically didn't stick around in that state because I didn't really want to be a part of that environment. And it was just interesting to come to a place like Portland. I go to like a small university. We really don't have like Greek life or anything, but I'm in an art field. I'm a film major, and there still exists that cutthroat feeling just among the other people in your class, just because you're in this industry that is very cutthroat. And there's still a lot of like competition and intensity that is it just seeps into the academic environment for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, Zoe, what about you? I remember you mentioning that, you know, your university was, I mean, between, you know, at home tumultuous and then the campus. And I mean, even that, I think we also need to talk about as well. Like if you don't have a sibling on campus, or if you don't have a friend circle, or, you know, if you have a lot of family issues, I mean, it can lead to some very rough times.
Yeah, I guess it can feel quite, you know, I think Becky and Wren said it really well, at least here for the UK, is that, you know, we do have especially when it comes to university, the drinking culture is such a big part of it. Like that is, I mean, if you don't drink, or if you're not there to partake in drinking activities, you know, we call it here pre-drinks, where you basically get slaughtered before you even go out drinking. If you don't do that, you almost lose a lot of the connections, but they're not necessarily even healthy connections you're making, because you are literally just getting together and getting absolutely wasted and doing a lot of things that maybe, you know, you wouldn't do if you weren't in that scenario? I mean, I did go out a couple of times. I kind of forced myself into, you know, going on these nights out where I've got to say double vodkas for £1, which was fantastic for someone with, you know, like £10 in your bank account. You can have a great night. But I do think there's a lot of, I think it can be actually quite traumatic experience going to university. You know, I know it's meant to be kind of like the best time of your life, which it absolutely is in some respects, but I think in other ways, you know, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of stress. You need to perform. You're meant to be getting a bloody degree and deciding on the entire rest of your life, whilst also trying to make lifelong friends, trying to, you know, stay up till 5 a.m. partying and then turn up at 9 a.m. for your lecture. I think it's actually like a really difficult and can potentially be like quite damaging time for people's mental health.
Yeah. This is also relatable. I actually forgot to mention our very first question came from our viewer Laura. So thank you for that favorite character question. So this is actually a great transition to our next viewer question. This is a similar university question from Fiona. She says, I would ask about the otherness and othering in the film. The whole environment, from the hazing to the parties to the teaching style, all seem to reinforce a sort of get in line or be othered, then fail and leave. An academic nightmare. The more out of control the central character gets, the more she seems to fit in until she steps over the line and is ridiculed. I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on this and how this runs in parallel to the character's sexual awakening and cannibalistic inclinations. So however you all would like to unpack that. I know that was quite a bit, but there's a lot there, you know. So first we'll start with Becky. What about you? What do you think about this question?
I knew you were going to come first to me. That's a big one. Can't I just go back to talk about getting drunk on campus? I mean, the sort of othering part of the film, I think, is so central to where a lot of the kind of tension comes from. It feels like Justine is just, well, like a fish out of water, sort of from the get-go. And in some ways, I think having Alex at the school, whereas that, I mean, I'm an only child, so I don't really have a lot of insight into the kind of sibling relationships. But I think if you had a close relationship with a brother or sister and you knew that they were going to be at a school that you were quite kind of nervous to go to, that could potentially be a source of comfort. But I think actually the way that Alex has already gone through that kind of rookie stage and that first year, and she's already established at the school, she's already aware of all of the rituals and has kind of been through them and come out the other side. She's got established friendships and relationships and all of that. I think actually it acts to other Justine even more. And then when you add in the cannibalism aspect of that, you know, Alex also kind of already has her own like rituals and ways of dealing with that Justine doesn't have any kind of knowledge about or comfort within. And I think it's interesting that some of the moments where you see the sisters kind of potentially becoming closer is much more around that kind of that shared aspect of the cannibalism rather than it is around the shared aspect of the school. Like, I think it's really interesting that I don't know, there's almost that sort of tension and competitiveness so much, again, especially with like Justine being so smart and kind of like correcting Alex's homework and things, which I just think is so funny. But I really like that they kind of play those two things, you know, the film plays those two things off of each other, so that there is this like real othering of Justine, especially in comparison to her sister when it comes to being at the university, but then they have this sort of shared thing that then kind of like brings them back together.
Oh, that was a great answer. What about you, Wren?
I mean, I think it's quite funny because everyone's like, university is when you are meant to find yourself, right? And you're meant to discover who you are and who you want to be and everything. And really, especially in the UK, where 18, no one actually has any idea who they are or what they want to be. And then they go to university and everyone's like, oh, you can be anything. And then it's like, as long as it fits in with all of what we're doing, like Zoe was saying, you're meant to go out, you're meant to drink, you're meant to get wild. Like anyone in the UK knows that Freshers Week is a cursed term because it's just a bad time. And I think Justine really captures that, especially with the cannibalism and everything. It can literally be an analogy for, you know, having to fit in gender-wise, sexuality-wise, just drinking, not drinking, what you want to do. And yeah, that's where I found her really relatable. But Alex, I thought, was more relatable because she just decided she didn't care and just did it her own way anyway. And like, there's a bit later on where her dad says she was always just herself and we never taught her not to be. So she went through the whole hazing thing, not like Justine, and she owned who she was and had her own rituals. And I think I related to her journey with it a little bit more than Justine's.
That's deep. I love how, you mentioned that, we don't have it all figured out, that literally, we're still children. I know I started uni at 17, so I was one of the youngins. Technically, like I couldn't, the drinking age in the United States is 21. Like, a lot of like paperwork things on campus you still can't officially sign because you're too young and you're still considered a child. So you still have to ask your parents for a lot of things. So yeah, that is totally relatable and a great answer.
You go from college where that's the case and everything's like that, and then university it's like, oh, you're just thrown in the deep end and you have to literally figure it out from just being thrown in it.
Yeah, totally a sink or swim, culture, just in there with the sharks. I mean, people who are adults, like, campuses, like there aren't just, freshmen there. I mean, there's like adults there. There's graduate students there. So next we're going to go to Karlee. What do you think?
Yeah, I really liked, I can't remember who brought it up earlier, but this idea of this very performative aspect of being thrown into this university environment. And just like Wren said, everyone, like, no one knows what they're doing when they get there. Like, you're told that this is a place that you're supposed to find yourself, but it really just kind of feels like everyone's just floating around, not really with any direction. And one of the only ways that you can make connections, at least at the very beginning, is through partying and drinking. So there's definitely that aspect to it. And the other part of the otherness that I thought was interesting was I really liked the hazing ritual where they have to eat the raw rabbit, and the way that Alex sees how hesitant Justine is to partake in this, but Alex knows that if she doesn't, she's at risk of being even more alienated from her classmates. And I thought that whole sisterhood relationship was really like violent and toxic, but that specific aspect of it I thought was really interesting for Alex to kind of step in and force her to do it, kind of, because it was like a you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't kind of situation. And she was able to recognize that, and having gone through it herself, maybe decide for Justine that it was better for her to do this than to not. So I really enjoyed watching that entire sister relationship, and I know we're going to talk about that more later, but yeah.
I know, like they were the heart of the film. Like I could have just watched just the two of them kind of, I don't know, maybe when they were on that road together, right? I wish like maybe they had just wandered off like into the wilderness or something to like try and find themselves or something, you know, and trying to figure this whole cannibalism thing out. You know what I mean? It would have, I don't know, it would have been a different film. Maybe that's the sequel. I don't know. What about you, Zoe?
Yeah, I think I think the film overall is a great representation of struggling to fit in. I'm sure many of us have experienced it as, you know, horror fans. It always feels like we're kind of the black sheep of wherever you might be, especially growing up. You know, I guess even when I was at school, you know, a lot of people took the piss because they were like, oh, haha, you like heavy metal and you like horror movies. You're obviously a weirdo. And then you go to university and that, you know, although maybe it wasn't quite as childish, it continued. You know, on my journalism course, most of the people there, they were into fashion, beauty. It was all these elements. And I was like, you know, I wrote an article for our joint class magazine on Cannibal Holocaust, and you flick through it and it was like, you know, top 10 beauty products, and then bam, I was like, let's put this picture of a woman being impaled right in the middle. And obviously, you know, everyone in class was like, I mean, I did kind of be like, maybe that's why I'm not really fitting in right now. I think it contributed, but I do think, you know, then you almost, I remember after that experience personally, I was like, oh gosh, should I try to fit in more? And I actually joined one of the fashion groups, and I you know, I do have an interest in fashion, but I, you know, I was definitely forcing it a bit. I was getting up and going, right, let's do my outfit of the day, and I was like, oh god, I've only got like 5 t-shirts and they've all got Cannibal Holocaust on. So, you know, it was kind of like a continuation of this realization of not fitting in. And I think also you know, Raw does a great job of showing the expectations that we have as, so I'm the eldest sibling, but I would, you know, I think there's always an expectation that if you're the younger sibling, you have to look up to the elder sibling. You have to, you know, perform, or whoever before you, if they went to university, if they got a degree, it's like, oh, well, you need to as well. Or even, you know, kind of your parents as well. They often put these expectations and pressures and expect for you to be like the most popular person at university, and if you turn out to be kind of, you know, the little weirdo that's sat in the corner going, well, I'm just eating other people, you know, at the weekends, it's yeah, I think they might feel a little bit disappointed. Obviously in Raw, turns out that maybe that's not quite the case, but yeah, I think it talks a lot about expectations as well.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you all have such great answers. I'm just absorbing. I'm just like starry-eyed looking at everyone. All right, Addison, we'll go to you to close out the question.
Well, I love hearing everybody's thoughts. I know I feel like overwhelmed, trying to keep up. But I think something you brought up that was part of the question was the sexual awakening aspect of Justine's arc in the story. And I think all I can think about is the fact that like her first sexual, like real sexual experience, it makes sense, so much sense to me that she and Adrian are so drawn to each other in all these ways because of that fundamental othering that they both have experienced. She feels this unsettled feeling in the university environment. And then of course he catches a lot of stuff for his sexuality. And I wasn't sure if I could swear, so I stopped for a second. For his sexuality. And there's obviously a lot of complex things to discuss about their dynamic in general, but to me it makes sense that for like her first intense sexual experience that Justine would not be drawn to a straight man, if that makes sense. It's hard for me to articulate that, but I'm like
no, that was very interesting. That was very interesting.
And I also noticed something, we talked about the drinking and the partying aspects of university culture a lot. And this is a very like, this hits in kind of a personal way. The way that sort of, you talk about like the fitting in until she doesn't, the sort of like she participates and she does the parties and she lets herself get riled up and like she tries to do the things she's supposed to and like hook up with a guy at a party. And then like she crosses that line and lets like her little, like, lets like the animal come out. And that bites her in the butt. And I like, it's very different, but I keep thinking about when I was a freshman in college. I was also 17. So if my mom's watching this, I didn't drink, but I did. And I had undiagnosed and untreated depression at the time. And so when I would get past a certain point in the evening, it would get a little too late. I would have a little too much in my system. I would have like a breakdown. I would have to like go to a bathroom, go to a closet and just cry and cry and cry and cry and cry. And I feel that same, it's very different, but the idea of like the monster coming out, like the little, like the part that you don't want to be seen, you have to go and force yourself into these environments where you have to kind of let yourself quote unquote go. But if you let yourself go too far, then you showed a part you're not supposed to show. And now nobody wants to talk to you the next day. Or it's, I don't know, just that idea of like, you're encouraging that find yourself, you're encouraging that be yourself, but not like that.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that was a great answer. This actually maybe hits two different questions that we're going to talk about. So you all have really been touching on this quite a bit. So what are the panel's thoughts? So, like we talked about Adrian, we talked about young Justine, and even Lexi a little bit. Maybe it's just the actress, but I was just like, I'm getting queer vibes here. And maybe just it's the film in general and what the atmosphere is. I mean, we saw that during the college parties, everyone was hooking up with everyone, so it wasn't, kind of, gendered in that way, or I guess with like a heterosexual lens on this film. So what are the panel's thoughts about the many queer elements about this film, including but not limited to, we've got to talk about it, the gay male best friend trope. So what are your thoughts about how this film handled sex and sexuality? So first, we're going to start with Wren. What do you think?
Oh, wow. Just a small question, no pressure. I actually really liked the way it handled it. I thought, especially as someone who felt a lot of pressure to express sexuality and gender in a certain way in university, it kind of hit home on a lot of points, especially like the performative aspect. Everything about that aspect was Justine doing it because she felt like she needed to fit in. She felt like this is who she's meant to be, and if she's not, then there's something wrong with her. And then, I mean, there was, in the end, she was a cannibal, and that came out because of it. And I thought the way her and her sister handled those things were so interesting and different, because whereas Justine gave over to the performative aspects and she did it to fit in, it felt like Alex did it more because that was just who she was, and she was like, oh, I can express myself, I can do what I want. And then in the end, they both had very different repercussions for the way they handled that. And it felt like they could either be themselves and get punished for it, or perform for someone else and get punished for it. Either way.
Yeah, great answer. What about you, Zoe? What do you think about this question?
I guess in terms of the sexuality and also the queer aspects of it, I think the entirety of the film is really sexually charged. I think you're absolutely right when you said that. I mean, there's even scenes, and nothing happens, but there's even scenes where between Justin and Alex, there's almost this. There's a couple of times when they look at each other, and there's just this raw sexual energy between them, which you're kind of going, well, that's a bit weird. They're sisters, that's it's not quite right. But I think when you put it in terms of being a cannibal, it's more about the hunger for flesh, for that sexual desire that we have, which doesn't necessarily, it doesn't fit into gender, it doesn't fit into straight or queer. It's just we have a sexual desire, and it doesn't matter who, or even in raw what that is. I think when we see Justine constantly thinking about like the horse and the cow, it's almost, is she thinking about eating it? is she kind of thinking about fucking it? We almost don't know. You know, it's the same with Adrian when she's staring at him when he's playing football. That scene to me just kind of embodies, you know, our sexual desires as humans, that, you know, you can just stare at someone. It doesn't really matter who they are or what they are, or, you know, whichever way you kind of like things. It's just about that kind of raw sexualness to it, and I think that's kind of what the film is portraying, that it doesn't really matter. Like, we shouldn't care too much about these things. Like, we all just have this kind of, not everyone, but some of us have this kind of sexual desire inside of us, and yeah, it's almost for human flesh and to taste and touch people, and it doesn't really matter who they are or what they are, to be honest.
Great answer. Karlee, what about you?
Yeah, to bring it back to the gay best friend, and like Adrian's queerness specifically, I was actually listening to an interview with the director a little bit before the panel, and she actually said that the reason that she chose for him to be gay was because she didn't want to have that kind of male gazy spectatorship imposed onto Justine. She didn't want she kind of wanted Adrian to be like the audience, and she didn't want the audience to sexualize Justine, even though she's a sexual being, but we don't want to see her through that very sexualized lens. So I thought that was super interesting, and I think it kind of goes back to what Addison said about how it was interesting that she chose Adrian to be the man that she has sex with, being this gay man who isn't really seeing her in the same sexualized way that like a straight man might. So I thought that was a really fascinating choice on the director's part. And yeah, if anyone else has anything to say about like the gay best friend stereotype, I'd be interested in chatting about that more as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, upon watching that film, I was nervous because, you know, we know in horror film, if you're the other, you know, individual in the film, that like you may not make it to the, you know, to the end credits. So it was very interesting to, like you said, the director had Adrian as the audience surrogate, but at the same time, like the fact that he could get the axe of the chump, as it were, you know what I mean? That I you know, it's actually really shocking that I was like, oh, Adrian's dead. Like, Adrian is not going to be in this film anymore. So that was very shocking. What do you think, Addison? I think actually you were the one who kind of brokered this discussion. So what do you think?
I something with Adrian that I think about a lot, and far be it from me, I would never tell anyone like how to identify. I think his identity is valid no matter what word he puts to it. I do, however, it's hard for me as a bi woman not to watch his arc and see a lot of internalized biphobia in Adrian's journey, where he has that line where he's like, I didn't go through everything I went through, like coming out and like being shit on and all this stuff just to fuck girls. And I find that really like I found that really interesting, because like clearly there's some kind of sexual energy between the two of them, and the fact that like that being like kind of frightening and being like kind of disconcerting. And of course also there are people, like, sexuality is not a box, you know, it can be fluid and nuanced and break the bounds of gender. It's hard for me to separate that lens of someone who's dealt with a lot of internalized biphobia. It's hard for me to not look at it through that lens a little bit. And I think that also, I feel like the film avoids the kind of burying of the gay trope by being such an inherently queer film. Like, by having this, like, there's no really a way around it. I'm not, like, I feel like you already brought it up, Zoe. I'm not a weirdo for bringing up that Alex and Justine have a very intense, like, almost incestuous energy to them. they never cross that line, but it's there because, and I think because I got too excited, because as much as the film is a sexual film, it is also at the same time so deeply a sensual film. It is like about the sating of appetites. It's about desires, like across the board, about hunger and want. So it's not just about the hunger for sex and like pleasure, but also, for that literal like sating of an appetite. And I think that's one of my favorite things about horror films that use cannibalism as an archetype, is you see it happen a lot. You see it with Jennifer's Body. You see it with The Lure, with Ginger Snaps, this like kind of overlap of like the sensual experience of the eating and the being filled with the sexual fulfillment and the sexual desire. And truly, at like Zoe, you said it at its core, like the hunger for flesh. It's not just a literal one, it's a metaphorical one. And so I think that the role that desire and want plays in the film is so tasty. I love it so much.
Yeah, the tastiest of morsels.
Mm-hmm.
So to wrap up this question, we're going to go to Becky. What do you think?
Well, just to say really that I agree with everything that everyone has said. So I won't spend a lot of time just kind of parroting and echoing it. But I think, so many amazing points have been made. I think the physicality of the film, like that kind of like, it's got like a tactileness to it, and every scene, whether it's kind of cutting open animals or intently staring at somebody else, and the way that the camera kind of lingers on people's flesh and their bodies, or if it's, it could have just been a quite kind of standard movie club scene or like dance scene, but no, like you kind of pan past somebody like licking someone else's eyeball. Like it's all just, it's absolutely infused with this just physicality all the way through it. And I think it's one of the reasons that the film is so affecting, because it builds constantly this kind of tactile connection between the audience and the characters, so that then when you do get a scene like Justine nibbling on Alex's finger, you feel so kind of like almost like physically connected with what's going on screen, which just makes it even more kind of like shocking. And I don't know, like you can almost sort of, I don't know, like smell it, taste it, it's just, it's right there. And I find that, I think that the way that the film is put together goes a long way to how then effective it is as a horror film.
We've brought up some really interesting things, and we've even brought up the performative nature of a lot of things in this film. So I think a nice segue is, what are the panel's thoughts on the performative womanness or hyper exaggerated femininity that Justine tries to force herself into when she tries to, fit in with everyone, and that she's, kind of forced to navigate that. It to me, honestly, it looked like a costume. Like it looked like she was, I don't know, it was almost like drag, almost like she was like, okay, well, skimpy dress, cool. Different hair, cool. It was like she had like a box, like a checklist, and she was like ticking off these different things. So what do you all think about that, and how Justine has kind of tried to force herself into this? And it seems like Lexi, maybe due to age, or just like you all have mentioned, she's grown into herself in a different way. What do you all think about the kind of performative womanness or femininity that this film talks about? So we'll start with Zoe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the film really kind of touches on the fact that, I guess, society sees femininity as, this, I guess, all of us, or that, grew up as females, there's always an element that you have to wear skimpy dresses, high heels, flowers, you like pink, all this to be what they would call a woman. Me growing up, I was a tomboy. I hung around with two boys. We liked jumping in thorn bushes. Why? Who knows? You know, we used to flash our butts to passing cars, but it was, my parents always said it was boy behavior. You know, it was, you're doing boyish things. And I remember, and, you know, I guess in a way, no kind of fault to my family, but, you know, they'd always buy me Barbie dolls. They'd always buy me, I remember someone once saying to me, pretty girls should wear pretty dresses. And I was like, I don't fucking want to wear a dress. You know what I mean? I was like, I'm very happy, thank you, in my oversized dungarees and my t-shirt. That's what I really loved wearing. You know, as I grew older, I kind of grew into, you know, I do love wearing dresses and high heels, but that's almost, you know, I discovered that for myself. But when I was a teenager, you know, Justine's age, it was, you know, it was like this obsession with, if you dress like a boy, you are a tomboy, you are very boyish, you're not a girl, you're not a female. And I was like, doesn't really seem to make any sense. And also my kind of thing was like, why does anyone care? I was like, just let me be, you know. And I think in Raw it certainly addresses that. It's, you know, that kind of, Justine feels like to be sexual, to be, you know, this becoming the woman she wants to become, she has to, you know, dress up and things like that. And like you said, Dani, I think, you know, it does come across as looking like she's wearing drag. I mean, she's not comfortable wearing what she puts herself in.
Yeah. What do you think, Addison? What do you think?
Oh, geez. Well, when you talk about that kind of performative womanhood and that like being forced into the box of traditional femininity, the first thing I think about is the waxing scene. And something that I find really interesting about that scene is something I love a lot about that scene is that it's Alex sort of, I think in her own way, she's sort of doing two things at once. She's like sort of looking out for her, and she's also sort of being like, this is the game we have to play. Like, that's that. And I think there's something very fun about, and fun maybe, that's maybe a fucked up word choice, about the fact that when she tries to force Justine, she's like, we're going to wax your pubic hair. And that is, of course, the moment that leads to Alex losing her finger. And Justine's like next step along her personal journey of awakening those appetites. And I think there's something very interesting to me about the fact that it's almost, to me, felt like the narrative is punishing Alex for trying to force her into that performative womanhood a little bit, for saying like, women are waxed down there, women do look like this, we do like this. I think that feels like a bit of almost like a punishment for trying to box her in that way. And then another favorite image, one of the images that stuck with me the strongest the very first time I watched the film, and I talk about it all the time, is Justine's mirror moment where she's getting ready and she's dancing with herself in the mirror, and she puts her lipstick on and she just smears it all over her face. And I love it. I love that scene. One, it brings back that inherent sensuality we're talking about before. Everything's so tactile and so like just primal. And it's also just that beautiful, like she puts it on, it looks so pretty, and then she's like, fuck this, I don't want it. And I love that sort of removal of the costume.
I really wish that Justine had, you know, in a different movie or maybe in a television series or something like that, she would have been able, like you said, Addison, to just wipe it all off, like take the dress off, be who she wanted to be, you know, what I mean? You know, find herself outside of, you know, the societal box of, you know, clothes like Zoe talked about, and fashion, and, you know, finding your identity through what you want to wear or how you want to look, or, you know, if you just want to be like gender neutral, you know what I mean?
And like, I love makeup and I love the like kind of performance of it. It makes me happy, but there's also something so satisfying about like the moment at the end of the day where you get to just like wreck it. And I will admit fully to this panel and whoever's watching that when I first saw this film, one of the first things I did was I put on like a really nice like dark lip and I just fucking smeared it because I wanted to know what that would feel like. And the answer is it felt amazing.
You know, it's so interesting that you brought this up with the lipstick smearing. There are a lot of films centered around women or feminine presenting people, right? where they do have that moment where they just smear it, or they just have fun messing all the makeup, up and everything. I think that's why like Harley Quinn is one of my, just fangirling, being a nerd for a moment, that Harley Quinn is one of my favorite characters for that reason, that she really, plays with a lot of those aesthetics and doesn't care for like mascaras running, or she's got like an eyelash coming off or whatever. It's just like all a part of like her aesthetic, and I live for it. So
I will stop talking, I promise, in a second. But if I may,
Right.
I think the reason that imagery is so appealing, at least to me, is that it's the kind of combination of when people who are into makeup will say all the time, like, I do this for myself, I do this for my own, like, how I like the way it makes me feel. And so when you have that kind of combination of the performance of the makeup plus the like smudging of it, the ruining of it, it's sort of that combination of I'm playing with this and I like it, but don't fucking mistake, this is not for you. Like, it removes the desirability, the kind of palatability to the male gaze. Like, I think that's why I really love that combination of these like traditionally feminine markers kind of futzed with and like melted and wiped off and wrecked a little bit.
Great answer.
Anyway, sorry, I got excited.
No, that's okay. I should have prefaced by saying that if anyone wants to like jump in, I'm trying to go around just to make sure everyone can answer, but in the midst of these questions, if something comes up, something bubbles forth that you want to say, by all means. But we will go to Karlee. Go ahead.
Yeah, I really like what everyone has brought up so far. I think oh my God, I'm sorry. I just totally lost my trail of thinking. What I really love about being a woman is having that choice of being able to look fucking hot and get dressed up, but only like on my terms. And I think that's a big part of this film, is like, it's not fun, it's not enjoyable when you're doing things that are not on your terms. And I agree. I love the mirror scene and seeing her put herself in this box and then just say fuck it all and wipe the lipstick off. I think it's really powerful. I think this is a really like visceral film. I think the imagery is really, really powerful. And yeah, I don't know. Everyone has been bringing up such amazing points. I'll probably just jump in if something comes to mind.
Yeah. Very cool. Now, next, I'm going to go to Wren, because amongst everyone on the panel, like, we identify, especially in the they, them, categories, that she is very kind of up there in the air, right? So, it's very interesting to watch films like this and then think about them when you're at this intersection of kind of pronoun and gender identity and presentation and this, that, and the other. So what do you think about all of this? All of this.
Have you got another 2 hours for me to talk about the gender expression in this film? I have so many feelings about the way they talk about it, especially womanhood in this, as someone who, I don't identify as a woman. I use they, them pronouns. I am a trans non-binary person. I rejected womanhood entirely. And one of the things I find so interesting about the way I relate to this film is, like, there's a lot of imagery. First, the lipstick, which stuck with me, the ripped tights that she has when she's sat at the party, and most importantly, the fact that she does have body hair, and it starts with armpit hair, and it's very, very frequently commented on. And one of the things I found interesting was I always was very uncomfortable with expressing femininity and being perceived as a woman. But since I started hormone treatments, I'm on testosterone, I'm moving away from womanhood. And it's actually when I started doing that, I became more comfortable expressing femininity. I became more comfortable wearing makeup or wearing dresses and things like that. And it was because I wouldn't be perceived that way. And Raw really hit that for me, because Justine and Alex, especially with Alex, they just let themselves be messy and do it for themselves, and they didn't care how anyone perceived them. They didn't care if they had hairy armpits and wore dresses at the same time, or if they couldn't walk in heels, you know?
Like there's, things about this film and just life in general that, hit on, things of like androgyny that sometimes you don't necessarily want to be gendered. Like you want to maybe, hit some of these intersections. Like you want to feel comfortable as just you. You know what I mean? I'm with you, Wren.
Exactly. And that's just also getting into the binary. Like, why are those things considered feminine? Why is body hair considered masculine? Like, I know plenty of men who love to wear dresses and skirts, and I don't think of them as feminine. They're still very, very masculine. And same with women who like to dress, wearing shirts and trousers. And I just think it's important to discuss why those things have such a binary, when really they shouldn't be gendered at all.
Yeah, like the last I checked, like we're all mammals, so we're all going to have a lot of the same or similar traits. So anyway, well, we're going to close this out with Becky. What do you think on this question?
So just to echo, I think one of the things that really stuck out to me about this is that waxing scene, and the fact that it just ends so badly. It starts quite harmlessly with Alex kind of like plucking out like what looks like potentially two of Justine's like eyebrow hairs, and then like, doesn't that look better? I'm like, I mean, it literally doesn't look any difference at all, which is then obviously what Justine says. And it then just kind of escalates so quickly from this sort of quite almost jokey kind of sisterly moment to Alex talking about like, I've been giving myself Brazilians, since I was a teenager, which also I'm not entirely sure that's possible to like give yourself a full Brazilian. I thought that was like a professional's job, but I'm not an expert, so I don't know. But you kind of go from that bathroom scene to almost immediately the camera kind of panning up between Justine's legs, and that really uncomfortable moment. I find it so uncomfortable with the dog kind of like sniffing around at the same time. Again, it feels kind of like, I don't know, dangerous, like transgressive, like, get that animal out of there. Like, this is a moment that, that shouldn't be kind of an interaction that's going on. And I love it when Alex kind of moves the dog out of the way, and you kind of see Justine's face like from between her legs, and she's just so freaked out by the whole situation. And I do find it really fascinating, amongst all of the stuff that you guys have, really beautifully talked about in terms of the gender and the sexuality stuff, that it just like really like seamed throughout the entire film. That it is this scene that is anchored on this kind of this hair removal, and this violent, painful hair removal as well. Like, there's nothing, this whole pain is beauty theory. Like, is there anything that has been shoved down women's throats through media and advertising more over, the last 100 years? 200 years more, from everything from kind of skin bleaching creams through to Brazilians, through to, I don't know, like dental work, like all of this stuff that is just seen to be kind of like, go through the pain, like it will be worth it in the end, because then you will be a version of yourself that is worth something, that is worth loving, that is seen to kind of fit into these neat little categories. It's like if you don't have body hair and you wear high heels and you've got your lipstick nice and kind of neatly and perfect and touched up at all times, then you are like a woman who is worth something. And I think with the waxing scene just going so catastrophically wrong, I think that's just such a powerful message. And I can't remember, sorry, which of you guys said about, you know, the film almost punishing Alex for kind of forcing, Addison, Justine, like down that route, because I completely agree. And although it does, it just like it escalates from that point. I just find that really fascinating. So
yeah, speaking of like animals and mammals and how things went catastrophically wrong, so Addison and I had been chatting about this actually offline. See, she's like already like, yes, let's talk about it. So we had been chatting like offline before this panel even got started, that one of the things that this film is really interesting, like leaning towards, like this could be potentially like a werewolf film, or has like a lot of werewolf like imagery. I mean, so I don't know, we're gonna dig deep into this one. So if you all have any thoughts about you know, this film potentially being like a discussion on, you know, overt or covert werewolf themes, or if you think this is maybe vampiric or some other kind of horror monster trope sort of thing. But we'll start with Addison. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I was like dancing in my seat. So I used to, by the way, I didn't mention this at all. I used to co-host a podcast that ran for 3 years called The Cryptid Keeper, which was about folklore and cryptids and monsters. And one of the things we came across in our research while doing the show was the rougarou, which is a derivative of loup-garou. It's a French, particularly a Louisiana French kind of werewolf archetype. And the thing about the rougarou that I love, and that I really, all I could think about when I watched this film was, this is a rougarou story. I don't know if they did this on purpose. I feel like they might have. In a lot of the variations on the story, one, it's passed down through the family. Traditionally, it's passed down from father to son. And here we have it passed from mother to daughter. And it's essentially, it's like a curse. And the curse is triggered when the person carrying that curse with them eats human flesh. So they could live their life as a regular person. It's not like they're bitten by a werewolf. They don't have to get transformed. But if they eat human flesh, it sort of unlocks this internal predatory, monstrous thing. And then, of course, in the rougarou myth, they literally transform into a wolf. But like the body language of Justine and Alex when they fight, like the fact that like breaking that barrier, eating that meat, unlocking the inner carnivore set it off, and the mother to daughter, like sort of hereditary aspect. It's all I can think about is that it feels like a rougarou story. And I am fascinated by it. That's pretty much the start of it, but that's what I was yelling about in Danny's inbox before this panel even got put together. I saw them talking about Raw, and I just was like, can I tell you about this thing I think about Raw?
It was like, zoom in, really?
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, that is so wild that I was like, am I the only one who sees like the werewolf themes, or just like different kind of maybe societal things we've like packed into being a werewolf? I was just like, this is it. This is like the first film I've seen that's like this without like a full, I guess, body transformation a la like American Werewolf in London or whatever. But what do you think, Becky? What do you think about the whole werewolf or vampirism or whatever you think this film might have been tapping into?
I find it really fascinating listening to you guys talk about the werewolf stuff. And like, I don't have any knowledge about the kind of loup-garou myths and all that kind of thing. So I will definitely be seeking out your podcast, Addison, and listening to more about that. It's so weird listening to you guys talk about those tropes when I was watching completely independently of you guys and all of those discussions. And I thought it had real zombie aspects to it. So there's like 2 or 3 moments in the film. So in the first kind of hazing ritual where they're all dragged out of their beds at first, and then they all have to crawl on their hands and knees to get to the party. There's like, it's almost like something, I don't know, like like 28 Days Later or something, where they're all kind of crawling along together. So you've got that kind of like pack visual. It's like dark, but they're like strongly lit from above with like fluorescent lighting. I just thought that looked very kind of like zombies on the move. There's the bit where she is being filmed and they're like mocking her with the corpse hand, and that almost looked to me like something out of Wreck, like that kind of found footage zombie, like very kind of pale, and like she is just feral, and you know, this idea that she's just kind of like trying to like gnaw on this sort of yummy human morsel. And then the last bit that really makes me think of zombies is at the end of like Rookie Week or whatever they call it, where they have like the siren, and then as they all just like slowly kind of emerge like into the dawn light, and they're sort of wrapped in their duvets and stuff, they're all just kind of like, they look like kind of like Romero zombies, like kind of like slowly, you know. So yeah, I love that you guys have seen werewolves when I completely and randomly have been watching this from like a very different kind of like classic monster kind of viewpoint. So I don't know if that just means that there's like loads of different influences in it.
But you know what? You're absolutely right. Actually, I think actually the box art of this film, right, actually does have Justine in this kind of zombie-like state, you know, with her kind of head down, like with the blood kind of running down a little bit. Her eyes get glazed over, you know, a lot whenever she's like, she needs to feed or she's hungry or whatever throughout this film. So it's totally there. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Not to deviate from my werewolf thing and bring up another monster, but a film I watched very recently that reminded me a lot of this film was The Lure, which is a Polish mermaid disco musical. I love it. It's wild. But one of the central elements of that film is having this sister pairing again. And you have the one sister that's sort of free with her appetites and owns what she is and who she is and what she wants, and the other sister trying to sort of resist those appetites and be human and be not that. And it does end up disastrously for them both. And all I could think about just when we were talking about the sister dynamic is thinking about the mermaids and thinking about that, like, obviously very different. And I don't think there's much mermaid imagery in the film at all. It's just, if we're talking man-eating, that's classic mermaid lore, like through and through and through. And I couldn't separate the sister dynamic in that, especially because, spoilers for the lore, not really a spoiler, they also have this kind of weird sexual undertone to their relationship in that film. And anyway, that's a little less relevant, but I couldn't stop thinking about it.
I'm gonna have to check that out. How do you spell that?
The lure, Lure, like a fishing lure.
Oh, okay, fishing lure. Okay, very cool. Karlee, what do you think? Monsters.
Yeah, I was trying to look out for this when I was rewatching last night, and I was definitely I saw some werewolf stuff going on. I was also reminded a lot of vampire lore, just because vampires are so wrapped up with, you know, appetite and desire and sex and all of these different things. I think what I was picking out from the film that was more related to the werewolf themes it was really more of like the physicality of the characters and how Justine and Alex carried themselves, really. There's a lot of crouching over, and they look very animalistic. And yeah, they're just always, even just the way that they eat, it's very animalistic, very primal. And I think that was my biggest connection that I was able to make out of that. And also, I'm a huge Ginger Snaps fan, and obviously the sisterhood aspect of this film was very reminiscent of Ginger Snaps for me, especially having the older sister who is kind of descending into animality throughout the film and is able to kind of find liberation through this desire for the flesh and cannibalism and eating people. I really loved that, and thank you for having me look out for that, because I don't know if I necessarily would have been thinking about that while rewatching the film if you guys hadn't brought that up. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. What do you think, Wren? Monsters? Which one?
I mean, now I can't stop seeing the similarity between Raw and Ginger Snaps, and I want to do that double feature tonight, even though I only watched Raw last night.
Yeah.
But I think they all have something in common with, like, all of those creatures, that it's basically about unlocking the most uninhibited part of yourself and kind of letting that loose. And I think that's what all of those monsters have in common, and that's why they're all so appealing to me, especially mermaids. But yeah, like everyone said, it's just really primal, feral. I can see all of those similarities, and it's literally just about kind of not restraining your own hunger, no matter what it's for.
Very true. Zoe, what do you think?
I mean, I'm so excited that everyone has all these theories, because like I'm the worst at coming up with theories between stuff. For me, I'm just like, oh yeah, it's just a movie about what it's about, right? So now I'm like, oh shit, there's werewolves and it's zombies and it's all these things. And I think, you know, I guess in a way, like so many of these films could be read as almost anything. Like monsters are, you know, their fascination. So in a way, you know, we can look at it however we want to. And it got me thinking a lot about pair together with Raw, which is Trouble Every Day. You know, it is very similar, and I adore that film to pieces. And I think you know, that film as well, a lot of people said, is it cannibalism? Is it actually zombie? Is it vampire? You know, there's so many different ways to read it. And I think it's the same with Raw. But now that you've said kind of about the werewolf aspect of it, there's also the fact that they obviously blame poor old Lucky, the dog, for eating the finger. And when Alex texts Justine, she's like, lol, Lucky was put down, mum's so sad. And, you know, it's kind of almost as if there maybe, you know, maybe Alex is privy to the fact that they are werewolves and is like, haha, the dog gets the blame for it, but actually, you know, what's the difference between us and a dog? And the dog and the dad talks a lot about how, you know, once the dog gets the taste for the human flesh, that dog's got to be put down. And, you know, maybe that's him kind of saying, you got to be careful, otherwise, you know, your mum and your sister are the dogs, and we'll have to put you guys down.
I'd love to say one more quick thing about the Rougarou stuff before I tap out on that. Is that there are a lot of more recent interpretations of that myth that scrap the wolf aspect entirely and lean specifically on the fact that what is unleashed is this all-consuming hunger, and that like the monster becomes a lot less literal. Supernatural actually weirdly did a really interesting interpretation of this with the Rougarou. Yes, Wren knows what I'm talking about, where it was that idea that it's latently passed down from the parent to the child, and it cut out the wolf aspect entirely and focused completely on, once this hunger has been activated, once you've unleashed that like primal appetite, you cannot sate it. You will never be full. And I think that is very anyway, that's all.
Yeah, no. Even someone in the chat actually brought up like the Wendigo as
yes, which there's a lot of comparisons between that story, between that and the Rougarou and the Rougarou. You'll actually even see people bring that up in writing about it. Because both of them are these sort of monstrous transformations brought on by breaking the taboo of eating human flesh. Anyway.
You know, it would be, you know, I'd be remiss if we didn't do this. So we've been talking in, around, and through, like, and past the parents, but we have got to talk about these parents in this film, because their daughters were going through a lot, and they just were like, have fun in the world. Like, you know, maybe the eldest daughter, she knows what she is and she's okay, but the youngest one is just like, well, have fun. and it's just like have a good time at school. Like I'm not gonna equip you with any, survival skills or mechanisms. But okay, so here's our question. Even with minimal screen time, the parents' presence looms large over the two sisters' lives. What are your thoughts about devastating family secrets and their impact on children's lives and their mental health? And do you believe it was the parents' responsibility to divulge this secret sooner? So we are going to start with Becky. What do you think?
I think so. So yeah, I think it probably was their responsibility to divulge the secrets quicker. I think certainly Adrian might still be with us, which would be nice. I mean, I think it's such a brilliant metaphor for the destructiveness of like family secrets and the way that secrets and the kind of poisonous aspect of keeping secrets can be passed down kind of through generations. I mean, it's just such a perfect like horror way to discuss that kind of like theme. There's something so interesting about the dad in this film and his kind of responses to the different women in his life. Like, we don't get a huge amount of insight into him and his wife's relationship. It's all quite in passing. Right at the end, when he's talking about, when they kind of first hooked up, and about her being like, it seems like he's suggesting that she was quite kind of possessive of him, and that then when it did turn romantic, that he was kind of drawn into it, and that then there's like a potential that he then like couldn't get back out of it. And I pick up some sort of potential like sort of residual resentment then to his daughters because of that, and certainly Alex. I think that his the way that he deals with Alex, or the way that both of the parents deal with Alex, like they treat her so differently to the way that they treat Justine. And this idea of them sort of having let her out into the world to kind of make her own way, navigate this issue herself, with some knowledge, but then very much just like she'll handle it. They almost treat her like she's a disappointment, but you kind of think like, well, actually, what were your expectations of her? Like that she's now a disappointment to you. And it's almost like she was the test run and they fucked that one up. And so now it's like, okay, well, we're going to do Justine like a different way and like see if that one works. And then like remarkably, no, that didn't work either, because again, you haven't like had a conversation with her and equipped her with certain knowledge before you let her out into the world. So yeah, I mean, I think they've kind of got a lot to answer for in terms of like the death toll in the film, and in terms of the fate of what happens to Justine and Alex. So
yeah, I mean, like at the end of this film, I was just like, the adults just left these kids with so much trauma, like with so much just unmanaged like trauma. And I love that you brought that up, the fact that Lexi was kind of just like, well, too bad for you, we're gonna treat Justine like the golden child, and she doesn't know why that she's the golden child exactly. And what's awful is like Lexi can't say, she can't just out and out say like, this is what we are, and they couldn't fix me or keep me from being like mom or whatever. And the fact that their mother never even had a conversation with them, or there weren't more scenes with her. But I'm going on a tangent. So Karlee, what do you think? Parents.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see it even in that very first scene, when Justine gets like a piece of meat in her meal, and her mom stands up and runs over to the service worker and is chewing them out for accidentally putting meat in her food. And it was just, it felt like the parents were very overbearing and really liked to advocate for their children, but not teach them to advocate for themselves, especially Justine. And I think that also, you know, has a lot to do with like what happens with Justine throughout the rest of the film, and just not being able to advocate for herself, or just getting pushed around by other people, honestly. And yeah, it just made me think a lot about how, I mean, like you said, these parents pretty much just sent their kids out into the world and were just like, all right, guys, have fun, have a good time. And it's like, honestly, how far from the truth is that really? Like, especially, like, I went to college out of state, away from my parents, and my parents are amazing. They're super supportive. I call them up whenever I need anything, but I was alone out here. I was just doing my own fucking thing. And I think that's how it is for a lot of college students, and they're not always taught the life skills or equipped with the skills to advocate for themselves that they need when they go off into the world. So yeah.
Very true, very true. Wren, what do you think? Parents.
Oh, I have a lot of feelings about their parents. First of all, that is a prequel I would like to see them two in college. I don't know. I mean, the way they both parent is so different. The mum's really overbearing. She, even physically, is very touchy-feely with Justine, where she isn't with Alex, and it's a completely different relationship. Same with the dad. And I don't know, I think it's more, I read it as like, she went through her own trauma, her mum, in school, and then I don't know, it's like either way these girls are gonna somehow have to navigate this themselves, and it's what is the best way to prepare them for this? Is it like Alex, to let her be herself, and you know, in the end that's her downfall, and or is it to overprotect, like with Justine, which is also her downfall, because when she gets there she's so naive, she has no idea what to do or how to be or even what's going on, and she doesn't even know why she's a vegetarian. She just knows that she's a vegetarian. And I don't know, I think I don't know what they could have done to prepare her for that either way. I just think the way they could have handled it better when she was going through it rather than beforehand, and just actually being there and explained like, oh, you're gonna need to eat people now.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? The more and more I think about like Lexi's story is just so, I mean, even upon first watch, like her story is just so tragic. It's so tragic that, like, you know, that eventually it seems like she's almost, I don't want to say driven mad necessarily, but the fact that literally she's put in a sanitarium at the end because they're like, well, I guess we're not going to put you in jail because of the crime that you committed, and maybe her age as well, you know what I mean, and her first time offense and all that stuff. But it's just, I don't know, just upon rewatching, it's just like, golly, no.
Yeah, and I mean, both of these girls are going into this situation with a lot more privilege than other people would be too, which is probably a big factor to why her consequences were what they were, whereas other people might not have been given the same leniency.
Yeah, and I think maybe even there's a discussion there, like, you know, young, like, white girl, horrific crime, right? And they're just like, well, you don't need jail, but you do need something. Like, we have to punish you somehow. So they're like, they'll get thee to a loony bin, woman, you know, sort of thing. So
rehabilitate you.
I was going to say, I'm not sure first time offense necessarily applies to cannibalism.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was just like, what is the punishment in France for? So, what do you think, Addison?
I think that these girls never had a chance. Like, I think their families never gave them a chance. And I think I can weirdly understand why they wouldn't want to tell them. One, because why would you believe it? And two, because I can imagine it's sort of being the fear of it being like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you tell your children, don't eat meat or you'll turn into a monster. Like I imagine there's this fear that they're going to just do that. But at the same time, everybody's brought it up, but they basically just sent these girls out into the world knowing that something horrible could happen at any point and that they would have no tools to deal with it, that they would have no knowledge about what was happening to them, that they wouldn't know. If it weren't for Alex, Justine would think that she was the only one. Like Justine wouldn't even have any kind of community or any kind of resource or any kind of anything. And somebody brought up the eating disorder thing. Fiona brought up the eating disorder aspect, like that definitely plays in. And it also, to me, reads, again, this is me being unable to separate my personal lens from the film, for like mental illnesses that are passed down. And this is, of course, very different. It didn't lead to me eating anybody, but I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and it pretty much came directly from my mother. And we didn't have a frank conversation about mental health until I was probably like 19, 20. And that was the first time I started to put things, I felt all these things click into place where I was like, oh my God, those were symptoms the whole time. Those were symptoms. And hearing you say it out loud, I'm like, these are things I've thought and I've done. And I thought I was the only one. I thought I was crazy. I thought my brain didn't work right. And it's sort of like obviously a much less dramatic version, but of being able, if the mother had been able to sit down and say, like, these urges will probably happen, they're not losing your mind, you're not broken, but you have to learn how to deal with it. You have to learn how to live in the world and not hurt people. It's that thing of like keeping that secret, locking that stuff away in the dark only lets it fester. Like it doesn't keep anybody safe from it. You have to give people the tools. You can't, because nothing's going to stay a secret forever. That's all.
Very true. What do you think, Zoe?
I guess I'm a little bit two-sided on this one, actually, in a sense that, I think the parents could have done Justine and Alex a lot of favors by potentially telling them in advance of this. But I also, if you kind of think of it on a broader spectrum of, I think, everyone's parents and families, we all have secrets, dark secrets. And I think we see time and time again in horror films, especially, that, often it finds out that the parents have a similar disease, or, it's run in the family for generations and no one mentioned anything. And I think kind of thinking about it a bit more is that, there's a potential there for whatever it might be, whether it's something like eating disorder, whether it's mental illness, whether in this case it's cannibalism, whether it's sexual assault, those kind of topics that are really tough to talk about. Could be a fact that, parents have their own trauma from it, and bringing that up and discussing that with a child might be a really uncomfortable and difficult thing to actually have to go through. I mean, the fact that when you see the dad at the end of the film with the scars all over his body, that came across to me as quite a difficult thing for him to do, is to admit and go, this is what I put myself through so I can be with your mother. And we never see the mother kind of talk about that either. And it might be that it's I mean, I am sure if you have an affliction for eating flesh, it's probably quite traumatic on your own mental health to have that desire and need. So it might also be a case that for them it's just they thought they could kind of sweep it under the rug because they're so traumatized by it themselves that they didn't approach the situation, they didn't discuss it. That's my kind of take on it.
Yeah. Now we have a guest question from Frank. We've actually kind of talked around this quite a bit, but what films would you suggest as accompanying pieces to this film, or ones with similarities? And they don't necessarily have to be horror films, but this is a horror movie. So, but what do you all think? We're going to start with Wren films, even if it's ones we've discussed.
Well, the main one I would pair this with is actually Excision, which is another one of my 5-star films. It delves into a lot of the same themes, especially mental illness, and also just it has the same morbid tone about being uninhibited and exploring things that, teenage girls might not necessarily be supposed to thinking about or looking into. And yeah, I would definitely pair it with that, because the main two characters, they have such similar situations, but they handle it in such different ways.
And what do you think, Karlee? A film recommendation?
I gotta go with Ginger Snaps, honestly. I just think there are so many correlations between like the themes and just the sisterhood element obviously is really, really huge in both of those films. And yeah, I honestly, I think those would make a great double feature, and I might just have to do it soon.
Excision is also about sisterhood as well, which I forgot to say until Karlee said that.
Yeah, I have to second Excision as well. I think that probably would. Let's just do a triple feature, whatever.
Yes.
Well, we've got the time.
Yeah. What do you think, Zoe? Film recommendation?
So obviously I mentioned Trouble Every Day. I think that's a fantastic one. Continuing on a French vibe, I guess, would be In My Skin. I think that's another fantastic film to pair with it. It looks at awakening, discovering the self, and really kind of just becoming in an extremely disturbing way, becoming who you want to be through, I guess, self-mutilation. And then the other one that I would suggest, which isn't a horror film, that it's kind of within that French extremity realm, is Fat Girl. That talks a lot about sisterhood and I guess the expectations of growing up being a female as well, virginity, how you should lose your virginity, how you get taken advantage of. And also it's about two sisters who are complete opposites. One is seen as the pretty girl, the other seen as, well, as the title suggests, fat girl, and them kind of discovering their supposed roles in the world as who they kind of outwardly look like. So those would be my suggestions.
What do you think, Addison? A good film recommendation?
I brought it up already, but The Lore, which is very, by the way, I want people to know what they're getting into if they watch it. I cannot emphasize enough that it is a disco musical. But I love it. But it is about sisterhood and desire, and also that fundamental otherness. Like, you have one character owning that mermaid identity and like being okay with the fact that she can't slot into human society neatly, and then the other trying really hard to assimilate and to, particularly, I won't spoil it specifically, but it's sort of a reimagination of The Little Mermaid, particularly reform herself for the love of a human man. And the sort of tragedy that comes with that. And then also a movie that comes to mind, very different, but a horror film about, I think, otherness and wanting to connect, is May. That comes to mind.
Interesting.
Which is a movie that I love, and it's definitely a film about like longing to connect. I love May. Yeah, about longing to connect and feeling isolated and alone.
So awkward too.
I love that movie. Anyway, I also Zoe's hitting all my new French extremity favorites with In My Skin and Trouble Every Day. Thank you. Shout out.
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna have to check that one out. And what do you think, Becky?
So yeah, I mean, I'd have to second both Excision and Ginger Snaps. I think those are both like really solid choices. And in fact, the only reason I can't second the others is because I haven't seen them. So I'm like mentally adding all these films to my watch list. But I mean, I would suggest Teeth. Firstly, just because I just love it so much, but I think it's got some similarities in terms of this kind of like wide-eyed innocence at the beginning, and then in very different ways. You know, it's a very different tonally, but this kind of discovery and growing understanding about a sort of a power that a young woman has as they are sort of burgeoning into their adulthood, and a power that, I mean, cannibalism isn't, you know, that is obviously something that is much more kind of real life and possible than the slightly more kind of fantastical aspects of teeth. But this idea of womanhood kind of being something that can almost be weaponized and dangerous and feared, I think is a theme that really kind of arches across both of those movies. So.
God, I love teeth. I would also actually, if I can toss one more onto it, a much lighter film, but I already mentioned it. It's one of my favorite movies. I never shut up about it. Jennifer's Body, which is a movie that explores sisterhood in a more like childhood front. Like it's not the bonds of literal blood sisterhood, but a type of sisterhood. And then also there's that sexuality and that queerness, and that sort of that coming of age. And I just was reading it yesterday, so it is fresh in my mind. Yeah. Anyway.
Can I throw one more out as well?
Go ahead.
Thoroughbreds, which is about two. just trust me, Thoroughbreds,
guys.
Wow,
this is just listing all my favorite films.
Yeah, that was so funny, the reaction that just rippled across my screen as we were like...
I mean, I love how we have these huge kind of pop culture Rolodexes constantly, you know, because we love films, we love writing about them, we love either making them or filming them or shooting them or podcasting about them. So yeah, this is all good vibes here. So we do have another guest question from Alex. I'm going to actually fold this into the question about the sisters. So Alex asked, do you think horror is the best genre for on-screen representation of coming of age? And I'm also going to ask, this film joins the pantheon of horror films that we've been talking about, sisters and sisterhood. So what are your thoughts about how their relationship evolves throughout the film? And is there anything, quote unquote, is there even anything remotely healthy about the relationship? So you can either tackle the sisterhood or you can fold it into coming of age. So what do you think, Addison?
I think that horror is absolutely the best genre for coming of age. I think the two best genres for coming of age are two genres that I consider two sides of the same coin, which are horror and comedy, because both inherently rely on subversion of expectations, of fears, and of very fundamental human truths. And I think that growing up is horrifying and hilarious and fucking awful and gross and weird. And I mean, one of my other favorite films is Carrie. And what is that's another just awful, fraught story about growth. I think it's the absolute best genre for it. I would even say if you could put a double feature together for a movie like Carrie with a movie like 8th Grade, talking about comedy and horror kind of going so beautifully together. I love 8th Grade too. It's the first movie I saw when I moved to Los Angeles. Anyway, I also think I love the sister relationship in the film. And I think that I don't know that there is anything healthy between them, but I think the thing that breaks my heart is that there could be. They have some really sweet moments early on and really funny moments. I love the scene where they're peeing on the roof after the party and they're just fuck, what? And Justine fucks it up and she's like, shit, no, I'm peeing on myself, fuck. And that's a moment that allows us to forget one, how doomed both of these girls are, and forget too the toxicity and the weird competitive. They have that kind of that it's the werewolf thing, but it's dueling wolves trapped in captivity together, like power structures form in wolf packs when they're in captivity that don't form in the wild, like the alpha idea and things like that, like the battle for like supremacy. That's not really a thing that happens with packs in the wild. It only happens with packs in captivity. And I think the idea that they're like two caged animals locked together, they're not able to thrive. They're not able to build what could be those like healthy pack bonds. So you kind of create this like, I used this image before, but it's crabs in a bucket. You know, they're going to start taking chunks out of each other.
Yeah, so Carrie's a great example where it's like the anti-Raw, right? It's like the anti-blood. Like Carrie was afraid of blood and like the imagery of it and what it meant as far as like womanness and the messages she was kind of beat into by her mother and what it means and like what's going to happen to you, when you mature. But the exact opposite in this film is that like, no, now you're going to be craving it. You're going to want it all the time. So that's very interesting. So what do you think, Becky? Either coming of age or sisterhood relationship? What do you think?
I have to agree with Addison that horror is 100% the best, or certainly, I mean, my favourite exploration of coming of age. And simply for that fact that, it is such a horrifying time in terms of like physically the transformation that our bodies are going through, whether you're a man or a woman, or whether you are having to deal with any kind of gender understanding about yourself. It's such a fraught time physically and emotionally as well. You've got hormones like absolutely coursing around your body and confusing so much. Like I look back at my behavior at that sort of age, and I could just that like 3 a.m. moment where you just lie there thinking about something that you did 20 years ago and that probably nobody else has ever thought about since. Like it's that stuff. It's the stuff that I look back and I'm just like, I could like fold within myself. It is just so cringeworthy. And all of that you are combating with this like hormonal soup that is sort of coursing around you, on top of all these like physical transformations, on top of trying against all of the odds to try and figure out who you are as a person. I mean, even going back to the university kind of conversation we were having at the start, if I was to suggest one change about that, like my university situation was an absolute nightmare. I was unwell for loads of it. I had to repeat my 3rd year, so I ended up doing 4 years, and I like absolutely scraped in the end getting a qualification and making those 4 extremely difficult years like worthwhile, because if I'd gone through all of that and not come out with a degree at the end, it just would have been the end of me. But I look back at it now and I think like if I could go into that system as an adult, as the person that I am now, with all of the life lessons and everything, I just know how much more of a success of it that I would have made. And I think the expectation that we put onto young people at that stage of their lives is like pretty unrealistic. So I think Raw as a horror film is just the absolute perfect canvas to explore a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, totally why we should have a gap year, right? To figure ourselves out.
Well, I did have a gap year and it still didn't help me.
So we need life and adulthood first is I think the universal claim. What do you think, Karlee?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about the sisterhood thing. I think we all pretty much agree that coming of age, being explored through horror is great, and that's like why we're all here. I really like the sister relationship. I think it's really complex. I don't have a sister, so I can't really speak upon how accurate it is, but I definitely don't think it's healthy. I think, like Addison said, there were definitely moments where you could obviously see they cared for each other and they loved each other, and a reason that the director actually made them sisters instead of just like people that were going to school together was because there was so much of this element of Alex is like beating Justine up like throughout the film, but Justine continues to go back to her for advice or support or just someone to guide her through this, because she has no one. And I thought that was a very smart choice to make them sisters, because that definitely makes it feel so much more believable that she would continue to go back to this person, because like that's her family, that's her blood. It's like the only reminder of home that she really has at school. And I just thought it was a really, really unique exploration of sisterhood, and really dove into a lot of the like the need to kind of like protect your younger sibling, but also wanting to give them like a harsh dose of reality at the same time. Like, I feel like my brother tries to do that with me. He's older. He's actually in vet school, which is funny.
Wow.
But I feel like there's always that that element of you want your sibling to not go through the hardships that you had to go through, but at the same time, they kind of need it to get through. So I thought it was a really, really interesting portrayal of that sisterhood kind of bond.
Yeah, I love how you brought up that that their relationship is abusive, and that can take on different, you know, forms. You know, it's not always physical or it's not always emotional. Sometimes it can be both, a little bit of both. You know what I mean? I love how you brought that up. So what do you think, Wren?
I mean, I agree with what Addison said completely. The two best genres are horror and comedy, and it's like, especially comedy, because I find one of the things about the coming of age, just coming of age as like a person, you take yourself way too seriously. Like, you think everything you do like says something about who you are and what you stand for. And so I love that, like, there were so many parts in this that were really dark comedy that it was just like, don't take yourself too seriously. Let yourself mess your hair up or mess your makeup up or wear ripped tights. And I loved that. And the sister relationship was so special to me. There were so many moments that I just thought was surprisingly sweet. Like, so there was obviously the bit where they were peeing together, but there's kind of the bit where they're having that fight and they're just biting each other, and then someone comes and restrains them, like they're both animals. They are restrained by two other people, and then after that they kind of like push everyone else away, and it's just them. And it's that sort of relationship where it's like, oh, I'd kill you, but I'd kill for you too. And like at the end when she was like swearing at her but then kissed her cheek through the glass, and I loved their relationship. It was so problematic in a real way.
Yeah. Going back to what we were talking about with the parents, you know, the parents not really, gosh, those parents, golly, you know, you all are right. This is like a tragedy. I think someone even said this is like a, you know, like an Oedipal, you know, like tragedy in the comments. I saw someone say that. So to close out, what do you think, Zoe, about sisterhood and coming of age and all that good stuff? What do you think?
I mean, I don't have a sister, and I mean, I've got to say, I'm glad. I think that we would fight horrifically. I just think it would turn out to be really bad. But you know, I think it does portray kind of that the weird relationships we have with our siblings. You know, I have a younger brother, and I'm very, very close with him because he's disabled. He has autism, so we have a very special bond. But also, you know, Wren, just thinking about what you're talking about where they're biting each other, you know, reminded me of this weird thing where my brother used to bite my elbow because I was convinced I didn't have feelings in it, which is like, when you say it out loud, you're like, what? Like, that's so weird. And you know, it's like when they were on the roof and they're kind of doing that peeing thing, you're watching going, oh, what's that? And then you think about the things you do with your siblings, and you do just, I don't know, it's a different kind of bond that I think you have there. It's strange. It doesn't kind of conform to any other relationship, and I think that's why it is, you know, often quite, you know, you hate each other, you love each other, you want to scream at each other, but at the same time, you know, like you said, Wren, you know, you die for them, but you also kill them. And then I guess in terms of the coming of age, I think, you know, everyone else put it so amazingly, is that I personally think horror is the best genre to kind of look at coming of age, because I don't know about you guys, but it was fucking horrific, you know, going through all of that stuff, figuring out you fancy people and you're like, oh, then you've got to have sex and you're like, well, I don't want to, I'm not sure about that, but, you know, let's try it. And, you know, it just like, it never ends. It never ends during that period, the amount of things that you have to try and do. And it's it's a very vulnerable and fragile time, and it is, there's a lot of horror in growing up. I mean, a lot of horror in being a human in general, but certainly during the coming of age stage.
Yeah. Before we close out, I wanted to kind of address some of the things you all talked about with this coming of age, and like those scenes with the two sisters, like that moment where you say, like, I'd kill for you and potentially kill you at the same time. When you know, the sisters have bonded, they both know, like, okay, we're on the same, you know, people eating wavelength, right? And Lexi, you know, goes out into traffic and like makes that person like crash and, you know, like kills a person. I don't know if they're dead, but it's implied, right? That she was like, oh, I know you're hungry, so go eat. And she's like, sis, no. Like, that's like, she's not over that moral line yet. But I mean, obviously they could potentially go either way, but there's a lot of scenes in this film that, you know, you're absolutely right, that are just rife for unpacking. I am so glad you all could join us today. We're going to go round robin. If everyone would just like to plug their social medias, what you're working on. So we're going to start with Wren. Go ahead.
So I'm at @B_roll_banshee on Twitter, Instagram, everything. And right now I'm working on a book about trans horror representation. It's going to be written entirely by trans and non-binary people, first one of its kind. So there's going to be some announcements coming for that online, and if everyone could keep an eye out, that would be great.
I'm so glad you plugged that book. All right, Addison. What about you? What's going on? I know you've written for We Are Horror, but you write all over the internet. So
so I'm on Twitter at Addison_Peacock. It's just my name with an underscore in the middle. I did just write a piece for We Are Horror. If you're on their Patreon, I just wrote a piece. Actually, if you liked what we were talking about today, I wrote a piece specifically about cannibalism and its relationship to female desire in horror, and how it ties to female sexuality. And then I host a podcast called Playing Games with My Heart, which is actually very different. It's about dating sims and romance in video games. I am also a performer on a tabletop podcast called A Horror Borealis. Currently, we're doing a sort of intermediary like thing between the regular arcs of the show, where we've been doing a tabletop reimagining of Stephen King's It called Losers, a Love Story. I play Beverly Marsh, if that's your thing. And then finally, it's not out yet, but keep your eyes peeled. I'm going to be launching a column on Daily Grindhouse, where I'm going to be exploring horror drama television primarily targeted at teenage girls. It's called Gossip Ghoul.
Oh, interesting.
So
big things all around.
Yeah, lots cooking.
Yeah.
Hi,
what about
Henry.
you, Becky?
Sorry. That's my friend. Anyway.
Oh, hi, friend.
Hi, Henry.
Hi, Henry. Thanks for coming. All right, I'll stop now.
You're fine. Go ahead, Becky.
So the best place to find all of my stuff over at my Twitter, which is at Bunny Darke. I'm also at Bunny Darke on Instagram, at Becky Darke on Letterboxd. But yeah, Twitter's the best place. There's a Linktree link to all of my writing. There is a link to my Patreon, and it's where I post all of my stuff about like my podcasts and appearances on other people's podcasts and various exciting projects that I've got coming up. So yeah, that's the best place. Awesome.
And Karlee, what about you?
Yeah, so you can go ahead and find me on Instagram or Twitter at Karlee_Boon. And then if you want to follow my horror film collective, Monstrous Femme Films, we are on Instagram at Monstrous Femme Films and on Twitter at Monstrous_Femme. And we're doing a lot over there right now. We have a raffle going on until the end of April that you can donate to one of 4 chosen causes and potentially win a prize. And I'm also going to be hosting a watch party in about 3 hours. We're going to be streaming a bunch of short horror films directed by other amazing women that are part of this community. Super excited for that. And yeah, that'll be at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time today. So tune in.
Oh, wow. That's very soon for you. All
yes.
right. Well, before we close out with Zoe, I'll just plug my social media real quick. You can find me at the DANI BETHEA on Twitter. I have a link to all of my curated editorials on there. I try to plug in the description box all the different places I write for. But you can even find me on like iTunes, where I've been a guest on a bunch of things. Salem Horror Fest. Just recently, the Candyman panel with the University of Pittsburgh. Hit me up if you want the panel. Yeah, you need a code to watch the panel. So just let me know if you'd like to have it. And lastly, we'll close out with Zoe, the busiest, hardest working bee in the biz, our founder, who got all of us together, who did all of this work. I can't gush enough.
Oh, thank you. That's too kind of you. But yeah, I stopped sleeping a little while ago. You know, turns out you don't need that many hours to function. But I just want to say a huge thank you. Dani, your hosting, as always, is fucking fabulous. You're amazing. So thank you so much for doing this. I think we can all agree that your questions were awesome. So thank you so much for that. And then thank you, Karlee, Becky, Addison and Wren for coming on and discussing Raw, because yeah, it's been an amazing discussion, and I hope that you guys will come back. And then a final shout out just to our Ghouls gang members, Fiona, Frank, Lara and Alex, for sending in their questions. For anyone watching, if you want to send in questions for future panels, just join our Ghouls gang and you can submit questions, and you can even maybe submit some ideas for those future panels. But yeah, thank you so much, guys, and I really hope that I can get you all back to discuss maybe something else, you know, maybe one of the other suggestions that you got, you know, maybe we need to get that triple bill in, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm down for it. So
let's make it happen.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for having us.
Thank you so much,
so glad
guys.
that Wren and Addison and Becky and Zoe and Karlee could join us. It was a blast. We could obviously talk about this film for hours, but we have to go. So thank you so much.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Bye guys. Thanks so much.